We've been talking about so many restrictions against China, so how different is this time around?
Well, it's a little different than the earlier ones that really kind of focused on advanced chips, such as what NVIDIA sells or chip making equipment that's used to make it. And this is really kind of trying to go after a chip architecture that's still kind of cutting edge and just being commercialized now and put into chips. It has potential to make chips more powerful and especially when they're applied to tasks like AI, it's the kind of technology that I think the administration would prefer not to get into potentially the hands of Chinese military or, and so it's weighing whether it wants to further restrict this technology that's really still in the early stages.
How important is for the Biden administration to implement some of these changes before the elections in November?
I think that's the thing. I mean, I don't think there's complete agreement on in terms of how to approach this issue per se. Obviously, they've been pretty aggressive so far in terms of how to restrict chips and chip making equipment, but they want to be careful with this because there is just a few months until the election. They may only have a few more chances to sort of craft how to approach this issue. There's also some deliberations over whether to further restrict high bandwidth memory, which is the kind of memory chips made by Hynix and Micron that sort of work with AI accelerators to train AI systems. So equally important to kind of the AI ecosystem, if you will, but still, they're still sort of in very early stages in terms of figuring out whether and how they want to further restrict that.
You mentioned Hynix, but of course we have the likes of Samsung and TSMC as well that could be affected by these regulations. How will that play into the Biden administration's calculations when it comes to these companies that could get affected from allied nations?
I think that's what makes this a bit complicated is if this is a new chip architecture that everyone's going to kind of embrace and be rolling out, it's a little hard to restrict it the same way you would a very specific chip that's used for a certain purpose. So I think that's kind of what factors into these deliberations and how they have to figure out how to proceed. They don't want this most advanced technology to, get into what they think are the wrong hands, but also, if this is kind of the future of chip making, then it's a little hard to kind of rein in the whole thing, if you get my meaning.
On the numerous restrictions that the U.S. has already imposed, how effective have they been so far?
I think it's been a mixed bag. I mean, certainly the impact that we see here in the U.S. sometimes is how it's affected the sales of U.S. companies, and there's certainly been areas where revenue has been impacted. But in terms of chip making equipment for sort of slightly less advanced chips, that's been kind of booming to China. And a company like NVIDIA basically sells everything it can make. So it hasn't really kind of been hurt in the near term. But the question is, over the long term, if it loses this valuable market, does that hurt more? And certainly it seems like it would.